always knew in the back of my mind that this is so incredibly expensive to have. So I did not take my drug as prescribed by my neurologist. I didn't even tell my neurologist about this because if I did, I already knew what they were going to say. They're going to say, well, you need to take this every day. Your disease has already progressed far enough that you need to be on this as prescribed.
Pete Rigney is a project manager and healthcare advocate living in Michigan. He's had multiple sclerosis for more than a decade. The treatments only get more expensive.
Because with multiple sclerosis, every new lesion you have on your brain or your spine is a lesion you will never get rid of. It'll be one that you live with forever. And I was aiming to have a 6-month supply because in my mind I'm doing the calculus to say, well, if I have a 6-month supply and I lose my job, well, I at least have that much medicine on hand. I wish I never had to do that. I wish I didn't have to make this price calculation in my head because I could never handle it any other way.
And nobody is immune to the soaring cost of drugs, not when the average price of a newly launched pharmaceutical is $257,000. But there is an emerging effort to rein in pharmaceutical companies' greed. In Michigan, State Senator Kristen McDonald-Rivet is leading the charge. And for her, it's personal.
You know, in my family, we have a hereditary autoimmune disease. I watched my mother struggle and pass away, but she died about 2.5 years ago. Really, really hard to get good care, but harder still to get drugs that actually treat the disease. I was diagnosed with the same autoimmune disease about 10 years ago. I have a drug where my copay is $1,500 a month. You know, so it personally impacts me. But also, my story is not a unique story. It's the same story that I'm hearing on doorsteps and in churches, and people are calling my office. I mean, the reality is the national fix has to come from the federal government. But it's not happening. There is a lot of dysfunction there right now, and we simply can't wait for Congress to act. We have to start working state by state in order to come up with a solution.
McDonald-Rivet is the sponsor of Senate Bill 485, legislation that would create a prescription drug affordability board in Michigan. The board would be empowered to set price limits when big pharma gets out of hand.
For drugs that are extremely costly and stressors on the healthcare system, which means stressors on patients and their cost sharing, stressors on providers and their ability to stock products, and on health insurers in terms of being able to finance all of this care. So for drugs that are these kinds of stressors, this board would figure out if something like an upper payment limit is needed, basically rate setting. So a board could decide what consumers will be charged for a product in a state.
Jane Horvath used to work for pharmaceutical companies and saw up close how prices began to surge when Wall Street got involved. The experience turned her into a longtime advocate for patients and reforms.
It became clear to investors that this was a great place to put your money, the pharmaceutical market. You get like the highest returns of like any industry you could invest in, which then got pharma companies looking more and more closely at Wall Street.
Today we got an update when Pfizer reported, but the numbers came in a tad light. Management merely reiterated their new lower forecast from a few weeks ago. Not what we wanted to hear.
As you know, Wall Street sets analysts' expectations for a company's performance in any particular quarter, and to meet Wall Street expectations and maintain your company's stock value, it became simpler to just raise the price to meet the expectations of Wall Street than to sell more product at the older price.
And in Michigan, it's a particularly acute issue because 60% of our jobs pay less than $50,000 a year. So when you suddenly are handed a copay for a prescription drug in excess of $1,000 a month, it just is simply undoable.
The Prescription Drug Affordability Board features two components. The initial work is done by a council of stakeholders, including patients, doctors, and even pharmaceutical companies who keep an eye on prices. They send drugs to the board, which investigates and then take action.
But what it will do is take a step toward taking the most egregious examples, the most egregious products on the market that are priced at a level that makes no sense other than unmitigated greed. right? So yeah, cancer drugs are a really good example of that. We're also looking at a lot of the biologics that are have been around for a while. They're not new drugs. So the argument about the cost of research starts to fade after they have been on the market for a while. These are things that have thousands of dollars of copay. Some of them are $12,000 a month. And that's the place where we're going to start.
To say that innovation is going to be stifled, I think is just hyperbole at best. And also these companies, they don't exist except for doing research and development. Like, what else is Pfizer going to do? I mean, like their business is way too lucrative to fold up their tent and go home and stop innovating.
Michigan would be the 6th state to enact a board with the power to set upper payment limits for drugs determined to be unaffordable. Colorado and Maryland's boards are getting closer to setting payment limits for the first time. The more states that launch their own boards, the more effective they'll be.
I think that pharmaceutical industry is coming to the table saying, how do we work through this? They are absolutely opposed to the idea of a state-level board, and in fact, in other states where this has happened, have been actively challenging it through the legal system, which we expect.
These upper payment limits are essentially healthcare rate setting, and the Supreme Court actually just in the last couple of years had a great decision based on a lawsuit in Arkansas, and basically said that state healthcare rate setting, it's allowed. It's designed with all these past court decisions in mind. So even if it were challenged, we've had some more recent Supreme Court decisions that sort of solidify that, a state upper payment limit should sustain a challenge.
You have an opportunity to lean in and help us in our community. More than the multiple sclerosis community, it's not just us that are struggling and fighting and trying to keep our heads above water. There are so many devastating disease and therapies that people have to engage with that are just so amazingly expensive that other people are just walking all over us.
Thank you so much for watching our video. If you'd like to see more stories like this one, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel to get more Perfect Union in your feed. And if you have any ideas for stories that you would like for us to investigate, just drop them in the comments below.